Scientists discovered a woman possessed by a demon and decided to tame it like a kitten. Let's find out what happened next. In the 20th century, a scientist named Henry West founded the Atticus Institute to study supernatural human abilities. He was particularly interested in telekinesis, extrasensory perception, and other paranormal phenomena. From interviews with his family members and colleagues, we learn that Henry spent nearly all his time at the Institute and rarely gave attention to his children, his son, Stephen, and his daughter, Caitlin. Henry's wife admitted with a smile that she had never met a greater workaholic than her husband. He was completely consumed by his work. The same sentiment was echoed by all of his colleagues. We go back to the year 1974. Henry West invited various individuals to his lab to run tests and determine whether they truly possessed any special abilities. Most often, he used special cards for these experiments. The scientist was also deeply interested in the alleged telekinetic powers of a Soviet woman named Nina Kulagina. Eventually, Henry came across a man named Norman. He appeared to display clear telekinetic abilities, and the scientist called in his colleagues so they could witness the phenomenon for themselves. Norman made a small toy car move across a table and even mixed cereal in a bowl. It was incredible. But then it turned out that Norman was just a fraud. He had been using a small magnet to perform his tricks. Henry was deeply disappointed. Soon, he had a new patient, Judith Winstead. She was brought in by her sister Margaret, who was deeply concerned about Judith's disturbing behavior. The woman looked extremely strange and hadn't left her room for days. From the very first testing session, Judith behaved in an unusual manner. She couldn't answer even the simplest questions, frequently clutched her head, cried, bit her arms until they bled, and sometimes even laughed uncontrollably. No one could explain her bizarre behavior. Judith delivered incredible results on every test Dr. West administered. One day, she even moved chairs using telekinesis. At some point, the scientists began to believe she was as powerful as a god. And yet, despite her abilities, Judith didn't seem happy. It was as if her mind and body were being controlled by someone, or something else. She effortlessly defied the laws of physics. Judith was left in the lab over the weekend so the team could observe her abilities during deep sleep. On the first night, a young staff member named Kenneth was on duty. He sat at the desk in her room when, suddenly, Judith rose from her bed. She began moving objects around the room, and Kenneth immediately ran out in terror. Judith calmly returned to her bed, and Kenneth was never seen again. Judith's behavior grew increasingly unstable. Her sister Margaret stopped responding to calls. Still, the scientists decided to continue their research. Judith often screamed in an inhuman voice, and before long, the entire research team was terrified of her, except Henry. He spent a great deal of time with Judith, and it began to take a toll on his mental state. The scientist hardly came home anymore. During another session, Judith suddenly began slamming her fist against the table with tremendous force, frightening Henry's assistants. They realized they could no longer handle her powers and reached out to a colleague from another institute, Robert Coep. But this man had no idea what Judith was truly capable of. She demonstrated her pyrokinesis, manipulating candle flames and even lighting them with her mind. Judith easily drove other staff members to the brink of hysteria. She knew their darkest secrets and fears. What's even worse, she could influence their behavior, controlling them like puppets. As the situation escalated, the scientists turned to the U.S. government for help. Under pressure from military advisors, they began conducting extremely inhumane experiments on the woman. During one of these tests, Judith once again began growling, attacking people, and telekinetically throwing objects around the room. Then, a thick black substance started pouring from her mouth. The U.S. government decided to weaponize Judith, using her as a tool in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. One day, the woman had a violent reaction during a spectral photography experiment, and at that very moment, Henry suffered an epileptic seizure. Even though Dr. West had never had epilepsy before, Judith's blood contained molecular compounds unknown to science, and spectral images revealed a strange entity temporarily leaving her body during her convulsions. It was only then that the scientists realized Judith's paranormal abilities were the result of demonic possession. Henry also began behaving oddly, and his family quickly noticed that. Despite growing fears, the U.S. authorities continued conducting experiments on Judith. During one of them, she was ordered to slow down a frog's heartbeat. Within seconds, The frog's heart literally blew up in its chest. Next, Judith stopped a military working dog's breathing. The lights went out. Judith vanished from the room and suddenly attacked one of the scientists. The researchers restrained Judith in a chair and locked her inside a special glass containment cell. The military admitted they had never feared anyone or anything as much as they feared this woman. Soon, a series of tragic accidents began to occur. Car crashes, fires, nightmares, and even stray dog attacks are only a part of the incidents that happened to those who worked at the Atticus Institute or to their loved ones. People became afraid to even make eye contact with the terrifying woman. One of the researchers found a paperclip in Judith's room, picked it up, and absent-mindedly slipped it into his pocket. That evening, he attended his young nephew's birthday party. At some point, the paperclip fell from his pocket. When it was time to cut the cake, the lights flickered, and the family dog suddenly barked. It turned out the little boy had found the paperclip and stuck it into an electrical socket. After that tragedy, the scientist left the country. He was never able to forgive himself. Despite everything, the researchers, led by Robert Koch, continued their experiments. With each passing day, they became increasingly cruel. Henry began to protest and demanded that the poor woman be released, but no one listened to him. They showed Henry the spectral photographs of Judith and explained that they were dealing with some kind of dark entity. The military wanted to tame the demon and even make it cooperate. For example, they would show Judith a world map and demand that she locate enemy bases. Judith was forced to influence people's minds and control their actions. She could do anything they asked of her, but instead, she made the test subject, a soldier, say the exact same words Henry used to say to his young daughter. Judith burst out in maniacal laughter, and Dr. West was overcome with fear. The military realized they were incapable of controlling such a powerful force. All they could do was torment poor Judith and force her to suffer, hoping they could somehow use her body to communicate with the demon inside. For that purpose, they resorted to electroconvulsive therapy, but even that produced no results. Judith endured agonizing pain, yet the demon within her refused to make contact with the military. Eventually, the researchers decided to turn to religion. They played church recordings for the woman, and it quickly became clear that she didn't like that at all. Henry began acting even more strangely. He looked deeply frightened, locked himself in his office, talked to himself, cried, and trembled with fear. He constantly complained that some kind of shadow had caught him and that something terrible was going to happen to him soon. During another experiment, Judith was instructed to temporarily stop the breathing of a living person shown on a screen. She effortlessly identified the man's name and location, and then began to telepathically strangle him. Despite repeated commands, she refused to stop, so the researchers filled her chamber with gas. The US government decided to use Judith to eliminate their political enemies. The woman was losing more and more control over her own body. She tried to resist, screaming, growling, moaning, and crying, but the military paid no attention. She began speaking in an unknown language, and her seizures became more frequent. The military continued using electroconvulsive therapy and soon confirmed once again that Judith was indeed controlled by a dark entity. They didn't want to involve the church, but eventually realized there was no other choice. They decided to exorcise the demon from Judith's body. A priest was brought in to perform the rite of exorcism. The soldiers armed themselves and prepared for the worst. Their plan was to transfer the dark entity into one of their men. Many of the scientists were strongly opposed to this, but no one listened. As soon as the priest approached Judith, she began to growl. The churchman put on a gas mask and walked into the glass cell with the possessed woman. The priest began performing the rite of exorcism. With each passing minute, Judith's behavior became more frenzied. Part of the demonic force appeared to transfer to the soldier wired up with electrodes. Suddenly, Judith lunged at the priest and seriously injured him, then collapsed and lost consciousness. The soldier who was the test subject passed out too. Robert Koch put on a gas mask and entered Judith's cell personally to attach a new set of electrodes. All of a sudden, both Judith and the soldier regained consciousness. The military once again used gas and took the possessed soldier away. All the scientists unanimously admit that they never spoke about what happened next for many years. So what did happen that night? The demonic entity attacked everyone present and left no one alive. Judith was finally freed from the demon's control and became herself again. She sat in a chair in the middle of a scene of utter carnage, completely unaware of what had just happened. Then Henry West entered the room, or rather the demon in Henry's body. He took Judith's life and calmly walked away. We learn that Henry vanished without a trace that night and was never seen again. Judith's story remains the only case of demonic possession officially recognized by the U.S. government.